Are you being driven or are you being dragged? Here's what I mean. So, for the longest time, I used to be dragged. And what I mean by that is back in year nine, I used to be quite an average student. The teachers said I would never get high grades. Like, they literally said that to my face. And obviously, I didn't have great self esteem at the stage, but I really took those types of comments personally. And it wasn't just a one off thing, it was kind of like a frequent thing. And it just made me pissed off about like the education system, about the teachers, so much so that I was like, fuck it. I'm going to prove all of them wrong and get as high grades as possible. And I eventually did that. I eventually graduated high school at the top of my entire year level. And they even said eventually, the teachers that kind of like doubted me, yeah, great job, respect for getting the high grades. But I think for that entire time, I wasn't happy at all. And I say I think because at that time, I thought I was happy. But now when I look back, I realized that I wasn't really happy then. I was just driven, or in other words, I should say, I was being dragged by this idea of hatred, this idea of proving other people wrong, and dragged by my own insecurities to do what I ended up doing. Now, the outcome was good, but the reason for achieving that outcome wasn't necessarily positive. Now, the nuance is this. Right now, I'm driven and dragged at the same time. But I think eventually, what is the most optimal is when you're purely driven by a higher purpose. You're not dragged by hatred, you're driven by a larger purpose. So for me right now, as I'm working as a social media strategist for one of the largest like education channels, I'm driven by the desire to get this message out there and to genuinely help people learn more effectively and improve their personal and professional lives. So for me, I'm not driven, I keep mixing up these words. I'm not dragged by hate anymore. Instead, I'm driven by motivation and a higher purpose. Now, here's the nuance. I do think at the end of the day, especially at the start of your journey, like me, where I am, being dragged by hatred or insecurity is somewhat positive if it leads to positive outcomes. For example, when the teachers roasted me for not being a great student, it motivated me to study harder and get high grades. Cool, positive outcome. When a girl rejected me, I was heartbroken. I was dragged by the heartbreak to go to the gym and improve myself. Okay, good outcome. But eventually you reach a stage where you can't be dragged by hatred over and over again because it is quite taxing on the soul to constantly go through that. And eventually, and I'm slightly tapping into it, although I still have quite a long way to go, where I'm tapping into that high level purpose where I'm no longer being dragged and motivated by negative things. Instead, I'm being motivated by positive things. And it's okay if right now you feel like you've got a lot of hatred towards anyone. As long as you use it for motivation, that is better than not doing anything at all and using that hatred for something else. So that's good. That's like level one. Congrats. That's already amazing. The next step is to try and get to the stage where you could be driven by something more positive. And it may take years. It may take a decade. But eventually, once you reach that stage, you realize that you can go at your goals and fight and go down this path even longer and even more like infatigable than you were before. So you won't get tired because you're genuinely driven by something that's a long-lasting fuel. Positive motivation is a fuel that will last you decades, if not your entire lifetime. Whereas hatred, it's a fuel that burns very quickly. And eventually you're going to exhaust it. And once you do, it's either not going to motivate you or it's going to burn you in the process. So always be careful of which type of fuel you're using, whether you're being dragged by hatred and that's your fuel, or you're being driven by positive motivation and that's your fuel. There's a time and place for each of these, but you have to make sure that eventually you transition to the right type of fuel, the right one that is the most sustainable for your journey. So always ask yourself, are you being dragged or are you being driven?